A 43-year-old diver from Clearwater, Florida, surfaced from what was supposed to be a routine exploration dive, shaking, silent, and clutching something that would change his life forever. Off the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, in waters he thought he knew like the back of his hand, he stumbled upon something no map or sonar had ever recorded. Half buried in sand, tilted like a sleeping giant, was the corroded tail of what appeared to be a jet. No distress calls, no crash reports, and no signs it had ever existed, until now. When he pried open the cargo hold, what he saw made his stomach drop. It wasn't just wreckage, it was wealth, untouched, hidden. When authorities finally arrived, their faces went pale, and when the diver told them what he'd found inside, no one believed him. At first, would you have opened it? Subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Carter Hayes had always been a man of habit. At 43, he had seen more of the seafloor than most ever would. With a lean frame, weathered hands, and a gaze that could study coral patterns for hours, Carter wasn't the type to chase stories or thrills. He lived simply in Clearwater, Florida, just a few blocks from the coast, and spent his days running a modest dive shop, repairing regulators, filling oxygen tanks, and teaching tourists how to float. But beneath the calm, Carter carried an obsession most had forgotten. He was a technical diver, a specialist trained for deep, complex underwater excursions far beyond the reach of recreational swimmers. He had certifications others only dreamed of, and an instinct for the water that was hard-earned through years of experience. On the morning it happened, Carter followed a routine that had rarely changed in the past decade. He woke before dawn, brewed a black coffee in silence, checked the weather and currents, and loaded his gear onto the Marlin Ghost, his reliable if rust-speckled 27-foot dive boat. His plan was to inspect an old reef system about 60 miles off the coast, a site he'd logged dozens of times. The spot wasn't well known, and that's why he liked it. The sun hadn't fully risen when he dropped anchor, and the water shimmered with streaks of gold and blue. As he suited up and double-checked his equipment, something gnawed at the back of his mind. A current forecast had shifted subtly overnight, and he debated waiting an hour. But the sea looked calm, and Carter, ever confident, decided to go in. The descent was peaceful. Schools of silverfish darted past, and shafts of light broke through the water in rhythmic pulses. He passed familiar outcrops and coral beds, but about 20 minutes into his dive, something changed. A flicker, metallic, far off to the left. He blinked. It was gone. Could have been a reflection. He kicked toward it anyway. As he neared the ocean floor, a chill seeped into his wetsuit. Not from the cold, but from something older. An instinct, a presence. The visibility was decent, and there, about 30 feet from his position, was something that didn't belong. At first it looked like a rock outcropping, oddly shaped, unnaturally smooth. As he approached, the outline became clearer. The sharp curve of a wing, the fractured tip of a tail fin, twisted and torn by time. It was a plane, a jet, buried beneath years of sediment and marine life, tilted nose down into the ocean bed. Carter floated motionless. He couldn't breathe for a second, even through his regulator. It wasn't just the sight of the aircraft. It was the complete absence of any sign that it had been there. No beacon, no markers, nothing logged in any wreck database he'd ever come across. He circled cautiously. The fuselage was mostly intact, though heavily corroded. One wing had broken off, lodged deeper into the seabed. A faded insignia, impossible to identify, peeled like paint from the side. The cockpit glass had shattered long ago, and fish wove through the empty spaces where pilots once sat. He activated his dive cam, making sure everything was recorded. He didn't touch anything yet, not until he could get a better sense of what he was dealing with. Carter circled to the underbelly. There, just along the tail, he spotted it, an access hatch. Half buried, half open, it looked like the cargo hold. He hesitated. The currents were calm, but something about the hatch felt dormant, like a sealed tomb. He tapped it gently with a titanium probe, and a thin trail of silt puffed out. No response. Slowly, with practiced care, he slid his fingers under the latch and gave a pull. The hatch creaked open with a noise he couldn't hear, but could feel through the metal. Inside was a dark compartment, unlit and deeper than expected. He shone his light in. The beam cut through dust and decay, and then landed on something square. Dozens of square things. Boxes. No, suitcases. rows of them. Some were cracked open, others still sealed. All old. Carter's heartbeat accelerated. He reached for the closest one, leather, worn, with brass hinges, and gently pulled it toward the opening. The weight surprised him. He steadied himself, opened the case, and froze. Inside were stacks of banknotes, faded, waterlogged, but unmistakable. Dozens of them, hundreds, different currencies. He could see US bills, euros, pounds, some from countries that no longer existed, bundled, tied, and packed as if for transport. He pulled another case. It opened partially, and a shimmer caught his eye. He turned the light. Jewels, red and green, some cut, others raw, nestled in velvet, as if meant for display. Carter sat back, stunned. He didn't touch anything else. He knew this was beyond him now. After a controlled ascent and a mandatory decompression stop, he broke the surface and hoisted himself onto the Marlin Ghost, panting. He stripped off his gear in a daze, hands trembling. Back on deck, the morning sun was high now, but his mind was still in the dark, 50 meters down. He reviewed the footage. It was clear, unmistakable. He sat in silence for nearly an hour before reaching for his radio. Not the Coast Guard, not yet. First, he called someone he trusted more than anyone else, Julia Mayers, his former dive partner and a marine salvage lawyer now working in Tampa. Julia answered on the second ring. "You diving or dodging me again, Carter?" "I found something," he said flatly. A pause. "What kind of something?" "A plane," he said. "A jet, not marked, not logged, way offshore." "Military?" "No, at least I don't think so." "You're being weird. What's in it?" He hesitated. "Suitcases, lots of them." "Carter, they're full. Cash, gems. It's real, Julia." Her silence was louder than any wave. "Where are you?" she asked finally. 60 miles out. I'll send coordinates. But I need you here. Today." By noon, Julia had made arrangements. She contacted the appropriate channels, warning them the site needed to be approached cautiously. She didn't mention the valuables, yet. Legally, the first step was to document and preserve, then determine ownership. By 3 p.m., a small team arrived. Julia, a maritime historian named Theo Granger, and a diver with deep recovery experience, Manny Ortiz. They listened as Carter played the footage. No one spoke during the recording. When it ended, Theo broke the silence. "That's not commercial." "No," Julia said. "And it's not military either. At least not recent." Manny leaned in. "Cargo's untouched. As far as I could see," Carter said. They went back out at first light the next morning, this time in a chartered vessel equipped with sonar, deep cameras, and full salvage tools. Carter led the first dive again, now with Manny alongside him. The team watched from the surface as they descended into the silent blue. The jet was still there, of course, still just as haunting, but now it felt heavier, real, the kind of real that comes with responsibility. Carter guided Manny to the cargo hold. This time, with lights rigged and cameras recording everything from multiple angles, they opened more of the cases. The sight was staggering. Stacks of US dollars dated from the 1970s and 80s. Gold bars, their stamps still visible. Loose gemstones. A few unmarked crates that hadn't been opened yet. One looked like it had once held weapons. They didn't disturb much. Only what was necessary to confirm. This was no ordinary wreck. Back on the surface, Julia made the call. Authorities were notified. A perimeter was established. The wreck was now under investigation. Carter had done everything right. Still, nothing could prepare him for what would come next. Word spread faster than Carter expected. By the following afternoon, a Coast Guard vessel had anchored near the site, accompanied by 2 FBI agents, a marine forensic specialist, and a federal observer tasked with verifying chain of custody. The entire area was now officially designated a federal salvage zone. Carter stood on the deck of his boat, watching as strangers in black wetsuits descended into waters he had once explored in solitude. He felt a strange mix of awe and dread. He had discovered something monumental, but the moment it passed from his hands, it started to feel less like a discovery and more like a secret everyone wanted to own. Julia stayed close, navigating the legal maze with sharp precision. She made it clear to the officials that Carter had acted responsibly. He had documented, preserved, and reported the site without tampering. Still, tension buzzed in the air. Salvage law was murky, especially when the origins of the wreck were unclear. While Carter sat with the forensic team, Theo Granger and the Coast Guard divers continued documenting the wreck. The jet had no visible registration numbers. The tail bore a half-erased symbol, possibly Eastern European, but not from any current state. Preliminary analysis suggested the aircraft was a modified civilian jet, possibly used for transport across international waters. As they opened more of the cargo hold, it became clear this was no ordinary smuggling operation. In addition to currency and gemstones, they uncovered antique items, coins from the 1800s, art fragments wrapped in protective cloth, and something that shocked even the most seasoned investigator: what appeared to be 3 sealed diplomatic crates bearing stamps from the late Cold War era. One crate bore a Soviet hammer and sickle. Another had the faded mark of the former Yugoslav government. No one spoke as they were brought to the surface. The tension on deck was palpable. Carter kept his distance. At night, while docked at a secure port, Julia met with the federal team to discuss ownership. Because Carter had found the wreck in international waters, under maritime salvage law, he had a potential claim to a portion of the cargo. But the diplomatic crates complicated things. If the jet was involved in state business, official or covert, it might be claimed by a foreign government. Still, his early disclosure and cooperation gave him leverage. 3 days after the discovery, the FBI held a press briefing. Carter watched from his apartment above the dive shop. They didn't name him directly, but called the discovery a joint investigation involving federal maritime and international channels, and stated the contents were being cataloged and assessed for lawful redistribution or repatriation. The story hit the news like wildfire. Speculation exploded online. Was it Cold War smuggling? A black ops mission gone wrong? A diplomatic escape that ended in disaster? And always, one question floated to the surface. Why wasn't the crash ever reported? The plane was never listed as missing. No distress calls, no black box, no official record. It was as if it had been erased from history. Meanwhile, Carter stayed quiet. He refused all media requests, giving only a brief statement through Julia. I found something I didn't understand. I did what I believed was right. But behind closed doors, the investigations were progressing fast. The bills were confirmed as authentic. The gold bars bore stamps from a Swiss mint long since absorbed by modern institutions. Some of the jewels matched missing museum collections across Europe from the late 70s and 80s. One, a blue sapphire set in a custom clasp, was traced back to a Viennese collection reported stolen in 1983. The most chilling discovery, however, came when divers explored a sealed section of the fuselage near the cockpit. Inside were 3 decomposed bodies, 2 male, 1 female, all dressed in what had once been formal attire. One had a holstered pistol still strapped to his waist. The serial number was filed off. No ID, no passports, no names. DNA tests were ordered immediately, and Interpol was contacted. Julia met Carter the next day, her expression unreadable. "You're not just the guy who found treasure," she said softly. "You might have opened a political tomb." They sat in silence for a long time. Despite the complications, negotiations began. The Department of Justice, after internal reviews and based on maritime precedent, agreed that Carter was entitled to a salvage award, provided he signed off on jurisdictional claims for the artifacts of potential state significance. After legal wrangling that took weeks, the deal was finalized. Carter would receive a certified share of the cargo's appraised civilian value, approximately $7.4 million. He could barely believe it. After taxes and fees, he was left with a clean $4.3 million, and enough to change his life. He kept his dive shop, upgraded the Marlin Ghost, donated to several marine research centers, and quietly bought a secluded piece of beachfront property he'd admired since his 20s. But the money never changed his eyes. There was something else lingering in his mind, something unresolved. One night, sitting by the water, Carter rewatched the original footage from his dive. He paused it, frame by frame. In one shot, just for a second, as his light passes over the interior wall of the cargo hold, a word becomes visible, stenciled in faded red letters. Valkyrija. He hadn't noticed it before. He showed it to Theo the next morning. Theo paled. "That's Slavic. Serbian, maybe. It's a reference to the Valkyrie. The Norse warriors?" "Yes," Theo said. "But also, it was used as a code name during the Yugoslav conflicts. There were rumors about an operation involving stolen assets from multiple collapsing states. A plane that vanished. Everyone thought it was a myth. Carter leaned back. "I don't think it was a myth," he said. "Today, the wreck remains under protection. Most of its contents have been seized, analyzed, or quietly returned to claimants. But parts of the story never made the news. The passengers were never officially identified. And the crates, especially the ones marked with Cold War stamps, have reportedly disappeared into undisclosed archives. Carter doesn't speak about it anymore, but sometimes, late at night, he still dives that reef. He says he likes the silence. And yet, every time he goes under, he can't shake the feeling that something is still down there, watching, something that didn't want to be found. Now let me ask you this. If you were in Carter's place, would you have opened the hatch, or left it alone, buried forever? Let us know in the comments, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. And hey, if you love mysterious stories like this one, give this video a like, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next discovery that might just rewrite history. The months that followed brought more questions than answers. Carter found himself caught in a web of whispers, rumors, and visits from people who never gave their full names. Some wore government badges, others claimed to be independent researchers. A few were clearly journalists, though they never introduced themselves as such. But none of them came with real answers. The most persistent visitor was a man named Leonid, tall, gray-haired, always in a pale linen shirt, with a faint accent Carter couldn't place. He first approached Carter while he was closing the dive shop one evening. "You are the diver," he said without greeting. "Carter Hayes." Carter narrowed his eyes. "Who's asking?" "I represent a group of archivists. We specialize in Cold War disappearances." "Sounds official." Leonid smiled. "It is not, but it is serious." They sat across from each other that night in silence for a long time. Leonid eventually said, "The plane you found, do you believe it was alone?" Carter didn't answer. Leonid leaned forward. "There were others." That sentence echoed in Carter's head for weeks. It was the first time someone had implied the wreck wasn't unique. Meanwhile, Julia was still working on tying up the legal threads of the salvage deal. But she was also receiving strange emails, some encrypted, some anonymous. One claimed to have knowledge of a sister flight that had disappeared 6 weeks before the one Carter found. Another warned her to stop asking questions about Yugoslav military flights from 1989. Even Theo, normally unshakable, admitted something was bothering him. He dug through old NATO flight records, Cold War intelligence leaks, and obscure Eastern European archives. He came across a file that mentioned a diplomatic air corridor code-named Iron Sky, a term used for high-value, off-the-books transport missions that flew under both civilian and military radar. Iron Sky flights were meant to vanish, Theo said. No logs, no manifests, just objectives. Carter asked what kind of objectives. Theo stared at him. Extractions, transfers, or worse, off-the-grid bargaining. The Valkyria jet, it seemed, wasn't just carrying wealth. It may have been part of a forgotten geopolitical deal gone terribly wrong. Then came the dive footage Carter never intended to share. A month after the wreck was sealed off, he reviewed a backup SD card from his helmet cam, the very first dive, when he'd opened the cargo hatch alone. Near the end of the footage, after he'd opened the second suitcase of gems, there was a moment when the camera caught something unexpected. A shadow moved across the wall of the cargo bay. Not his, not a fish. It was long, humanoid, and drifting just behind a half-open crate. For a second, Carter thought it was a trick of the light. He replayed it 10 times, slowed it down. It was clear. There had been someone, or something else down there. He didn't tell Julia or Theo. Not yet. Instead, he returned to the site alone one morning under the guise of a routine reef survey. The perimeter had been relaxed. The wreck was now under remote surveillance, not constant patrol. He slipped in early, avoided the buoys, and descended just as the sun crested the horizon. The plane hadn't moved, but the water around it felt different, darker, more still. Inside the cargo hold, he retraced his steps. The suitcases were gone. So were the crates. But on the wall, where the shadow had passed, something had been etched into the metal, freshly, as if with a knife. A single word. Stay. Carter recoiled, heart pounding. It hadn't been there before. He was sure. He surfaced quickly, the silence of the sea crushing in on him like a weight. From that day forward, he never dove the site again. But the mystery kept growing. DNA results on the bodies inside the jet had stalled. The FBI claimed partial matches to Eastern European nationals, but nothing conclusive. The woman's remains were buried in a sealed government grave. The men were never officially identified. No next of kin. No public reports. Just quiet closures. Still, leaks continued. A journalist from Germany reached out to Theo with documents supposedly retrieved from the Stasi archives before the fall of the Berlin Wall. One included a blurred photo of a plane tail, eerily similar to the Valkyria. The file mentioned an operation, Merlin's Horde. It referred to an unauthorized alliance between defecting Yugoslav agents and rogue Western operatives. The plan: transport stolen cultural treasures, war gold, and blackmail material to a neutral location. The plane vanished en route over international waters. The operation was buried. Carter, upon hearing this, could only ask one question. Why wasn't it found until now? Theo had no answer. Maybe it wasn't meant to be. Meanwhile, Julia dug into the financials. Of the $7.4 million awarded to Carter, only a portion came from the currency and gems. Another portion came from private, off-the-record institutions. One deposit came from a shell company linked to a now-defunct Swiss bank. She followed the trail. The deeper she went, the stranger it got. One of the gem appraisers who cataloged the artifacts disappeared during a trip to Montenegro. Another, an old woman from Zurich, died suddenly just before giving testimony about a ruby that had matched a stolen piece from 1981. 2 experts gone. 1 silenced. No cause officially linked. Julia stopped her investigation soon after. And Carter? He withdrew further. He still ran the shop, still taught beginners. But something had shifted in him. He kept to himself, refused interviews, occasionally took late-night walks along the shore, looking out at the sea with a gaze that seemed more haunted than curious. Then one night, a letter arrived. No envelope, just a single sheet of yellowed paper slid under the dive shop's front door. It read, "You were never supposed to find it. It was never supposed to land." No signature, no return address. Carter burned the note without telling anyone. But that night, he had a dream. He was underwater, alone, surrounded by blackness. Ahead of him floated the Valkyria, intact, shimmering, as if newly built. The hatch opened slowly, silently. Inside stood the woman from the cockpit. Her face was pale, eyes wide, arms outstretched. She whispered, "We never landed." He woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. It wasn't the first time he'd dreamed of the wreck, but this one felt different, like a warning or a message. To this day, he keeps a private journal filled with maps, coordinates, sonar sketches, and notes from conversations he never told Julia or Theo about. Visitors who came in pairs, a boat that followed him once at dusk, a phone call with nothing but breathing on the other end. He writes it all down, because deep down, Carter knows this isn't over. The Valkyria may have gone down, but its story, whatever it truly was, didn't end with the discovery. It only began. The years passed, but the weight of the Valkyria never lifted. Though the headlines faded and the authorities sealed their files, Carter felt it in every gust of salt wind that pushed across Clearwater's quiet coast. The plane was gone now, at least officially. After the initial investigations, salvage, and evidence collection, the wreck was eventually deemed unstable and too hazardous to remain accessible. Government divers returned for one final operation. They sealed it shut with reinforced composite panels, secured it with seabed anchors, and buried most of it beneath crushed rock and engineered sediment. To the public, the wreck was just another Cold War artifact, shrouded in bureaucracy and rumors. Forgotten, unresolved. But Carter hadn't forgotten, and he never stopped asking questions. He'd quietly traveled abroad under the radar, visiting old archives in Europe with Julia's help. In Zagreb, they found a fragment of an old customs manifest listing an unregistered aircraft departing on March 12, 1989, the same day the Valkyria disappeared. It listed no pilot, no passengers, only 2 entries under cargo, item 14 KT and glass library. No further context, no surviving logs. In Prague, they were shown a file by a retired intelligence archivist who remembered Operation Valkyrie, but not by that name. According to him, there were whispers among Cold War handlers of a plane that never landed, a cache that never arrived. Some believed it carried data, Others thought it was meant as an offering, a gift of leverage in exchange for asylum. But no one ever confirmed where it went, until Carter found it. By the time they reached Vienna, even Julia was beginning to believe what Carter had suspected for months. The jet was not just a smuggling vessel. It was a ghost ship of history, a last desperate attempt to hide or preserve something that could have shifted the world's balance in 1989, something too dangerous or too sacred to arrive at its destination. And maybe something or someone didn't want it to be found. Then came the final twist. Back in the US, Carter received a package, no return address, wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, a VHS tape labeled only with a date, March 11, 1989. He found an old player and inserted it. The footage was grainy, silent, and time-stamped. It showed a tarmac at night, somewhere cold, based on the visible breath of the men loading the jet. The camera was stationary, possibly part of a security system. The aircraft bore the same faded insignia as the Valkyria. He watched as cases were loaded, identical to the ones he'd found underwater. Then a woman appeared in frame, the same face from his dream. She wore a coat with a fur collar and carried a briefcase. She looked straight at the camera for a moment, then boarded the plane. Seconds later, the screen went black. That briefcase, Carter realized, had never been found in the wreck. Was it destroyed or taken? Before he arrived, he shared the footage with no one, not even Julia. In his bones, Carter felt it wasn't over. And one day, he received confirmation. He was at the dock preparing gear for a deep shelf dive when a man approached. Young, dressed in casual fishing gear, sunglasses even in the shade, American accent, clean, precise voice. "You Carter Hayes?" Carter nodded. The man smiled thinly. "You weren't the first to find the Valkyria, just the first to report it." Carter froze. "Who are you?" The man handed him a small card with no name, only coordinates. Some things don't stay buried. Some were never meant to be found. Before Carter could speak, the man was gone, disappearing into the crowd like fog. He stared at the card. The coordinates pointed to an island chain deep in the Caribbean, a place known for shipwrecks, drug routes, and classified Cold War watch posts. That night, Carter packed a private kit, just enough gear for a short recon dive. He didn't tell Julia, didn't tell Theo, didn't even tell himself what he was looking for. But he went, and when he returned, he said nothing. Only that the Valkyria wasn't the last. So now we ask you, what do you think the real mission of that jet was? Was it carrying money, leverage, secrets, or something else entirely? Could there be more like it, lost beneath the waves, still holding pieces of a forgotten war? And most importantly, should Carter have taken that last dive? Let us know in the comments. We read every one. And tell us where in the world you're watching from. If this mystery had you holding your breath, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next dive into the unknown. There's always another layer, and sometimes the deepest secrets are the ones that surface last. Carter never spoke publicly about the Caribbean trip. Not to the authorities, not to Julia, not even in his journal. But after he returned, something in him shifted, noticeable even to his closest friends. He was more reserved, more deliberate, as if he'd seen something that didn't belong to this world. 3 months passed in relative silence, until one evening Theo received an encrypted file in his inbox from an anonymous sender. No message, just a timestamp and a video attachment. It was footage, clearer than anything they'd seen so far. Drone quality, dated only 2 weeks before. The camera hovered over a shallow reef formation in the British Virgin Islands. At first, the footage was unremarkable. Then the drone tilted and revealed the unmistakable shape of an aircraft tail, partially embedded in coral. Different model, different markings, but unmistakably a jet. No known crash had ever been reported there, and no salvage records existed. That night, Theo called Julia, who drove straight to Carter's house. He was waiting for her, gear already packed. "How long have you known?" she asked him. He looked at her, calm. "Since the man at the dock." She paced the room. "You think it's another Valkyria? I think it's worse." Julia didn't ask what that meant. She could see it in his eyes. Something had changed him. The next morning, they flew to the island under aliases and rented a charter under the guise of marine surveyors. The local waters were crystal clear, teeming with life. But beneath the surface, the silence told a different story. The second jet was smaller, lighter, its fuselage almost entirely intact. No markings, no registration. Inside, the same story unfolded. Sealed cases, torn upholstery, items that looked diplomatic in nature, some submerged, others vacuum-sealed and pristine. Carter and Julia recovered a few for analysis, but kept their activities quiet. Back in Florida, they opened one of the crates. Inside was a rolled canvas. When unwrapped, they stared in silence at what lay before them. A painting. Not a copy, not a forgery. An original. A Renaissance piece thought lost during World War II. The signature was faded, but the brushwork was unmistakable. Historians had long speculated it had been destroyed in a firebombing. Instead, it had been hidden on a plane that never officially existed. And that wasn't all. Alongside the canvas were black and white photographs, hundreds of them, tightly packed into waterproof folders. Most were unremarkable, but a few depicted scenes that couldn't be explained. High-ranking Cold War officials meeting in secret locations that, according to records, they'd never visited. Blueprints for surveillance technology a decade ahead of its time. One image, in particular, stood out. A room filled with gold ingots stacked floor to ceiling, guarded by men in uniforms with no insignias. The final image, a page from a notebook, translated into English. The truth isn't buried, it's scattered. Julia backed away. This isn't about war, it's about history control. Carter nodded slowly. And someone's been collecting the pieces. What followed was a chain reaction of closed-door meetings, federal silence, and increased surveillance around dive sites up and down the East Coast. Research files disappeared from servers. 3 historical societies were quietly disbanded. Even Theo was warned to back off after a lecture he gave in Boston drew too much attention. But Carter didn't stop. He kept diving, kept searching. What had begun as a single, random discovery was now clearly part of something larger, something intentional. Across 3 oceans, more wrecks were rumored, some verified, others ghost stories, but all linked by a common pattern: unregistered flights, Cold War relics, missing art, missing data, and a complete absence of official records. It was like discovering the outline of a shadow government, not one of politics, but of memory. Someone had spent decades collecting pieces of a fractured truth. The Valkyria was merely one chapter in a far older book. And Carter? He had become the accidental keeper of that book. In his final journal entry, Carter wrote something strange. I used to think the sea held secrets because it was deep, but now I know. It's because no one listens to the things it whispers. He disappeared from public view shortly after, sold his dive shop, left no forwarding address. Some say he moved to an island in the Pacific. Others claim he's still diving under different names, finding pieces of the puzzle and burying them deeper than before. But one rumor remains, persistent, chilling, that somewhere beneath the waves, there is a third plane, one that was never meant to return, one that carries not just artifacts, but instructions. And maybe, just maybe, Carter is the only one who's read them. So now we ask you, what do you think was the real mission behind these unmarked jets? Who was trying to hide history, and who is still trying to rewrite it? And do you believe Carter was lucky to survive, or cursed to remember? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear your theories. And tell us where in the world you're watching from. You might just help solve the next piece of the puzzle. If this story gripped you like the deep currents of the ocean, give us a like, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications. Because some truths don't float, they dive deeper. And the next one could surface, with you.